Hello and welcome to a non-reader book guide video. Who would have thought that we would have another one of these within the same year? The fact that I have now read, I'm up to 13 books this year is absolutely insane. And you might be thinking that doesn't classify me as a non-reader. Well, I'm sorry to tell you, it does. It still takes me between 3 to 6 weeks to finish a book. And there have been a few times where I've started a book and have not finished because I just cannot commit. Now, since the last video, I have read 6 books. Now, you may be thinking, Maddie, that's only 4. We'll get back to that in a minute. But I'm here to give you complete transparency, honesty, and just a brutal review as to whether or not I think you can read this as a non-reader. I actually have already filmed this and I fumbled my way through it because it takes me so long to read the books. I kind of couldn't remember what certain things are about and I just couldn't speak it as fluently as I really wanted to. So today we have notes, just a couple of little blurbs here and there just to refresh my memory as to what they're about. I tell you what I do know is whether or not they're actually worth reading. So let's just get into it. The first book we have is The Housemaid's Secret by Freida McFadden. If you watched my previous video, you would know that I read the first one. This is the sequel to what we have now found out is a 3-part series. If you don't know what the Housemaid series is about, it's essentially following this character called Millie, who has a bit of a troubling past. And because of a criminal record, she has limited job options. So she decides to be a housemaid. But of course, being a housemaid for the very rich and privileged comes with a price. Now, I won't say much about this book because if you've read the first one, this is essentially the same. I don't know what I was expecting with this, but I was probably maybe not expecting literally the exact same it's not the exact same plot, it's pretty much just the exact same idea. Other than the fact that you already know Millie's background, it's the same in the sense that she needs a job, she gets a job with the rich, and there's some sort of secret and some sort of form of abuse, and she just can't help but save the victim. Or at least try. I had a lot of people who read this in my life that said they were very disappointed in this, and that the fact that it was the exact same concepts just wasn't entertaining for them. I will say I think I may have enjoyed this one better than the first one. I feel like the twist was a little bit better, but then Freida likes to do this thing where she goes, oh, so the storyline is this is what's happening, so this is what we're gonna try and fix. But then she comes back around and goes, oh wait, that's not the problem, this is the problem. Which is fine, that's very entertaining. But then she does a full 360 and goes, oh but wait, there's more. And I just find it slightly unnecessary. I will say as a non-reader, she is a great author to start with because her writing is so simple. It's extremely easy to follow, and honestly, her stories are interesting enough to keep you engaged. I just think that if you've read the first one, try out the second one, but I don't think I'm going to be reaching for the third. Next up, we have Icebreaker by Hannah Grace, and if you have been on Book Talk, you know this book. And honestly, the hype is valid. This was my first smut book, and my oh my was it smutty. I'll come back to that. Not only is it smart, but it's also a romance novel. It follows 2 characters, Anastasia and Nate, who are both at university. Anastasia is there as a figure skater, hoping to land a spot at the Olympics, whereas Nate is the captain of the hockey team. And due to a prank that happens on one of the ice rinks that causes it to close, both the hockey players and the figure ice skaters have to come together and share and learn to use the space together and therefore form relationships, and their worlds kind of get melded together like they hadn't been before. This is a enemies to lovers, which is very predictable, but there's a reason why people like it and people keep writing it, is because it's enjoyable. It's good to see the development of their relationship. So the smut. I enjoyed it. It wasn't the entire book, which I very much liked. There was still a very important storyline that actually had quite a bit of depth to it, especially near the end of the book. And it was enjoyable. So you weren't just hanging around waiting for someone to get spicy and then, being bored for the next 8 chapters. The smut was sprinkled in every once in a while. I think there was maybe 4, maybe 5 scenes that appeared that were quite spicy. And the only thing I would say, and this may be me, it may be my vanilla little heart, I thought it was good just up until 1 or 2 things that would happen. Either something would be said or an action would be made and I just go, ooh, That's a little too far. Like, you'd be hot and heavy into it, and then just one thing would happen and just snap you right out. So that was the only thing that got me. But if you're a little bit more adventurous than me, then this is right up your alley. Or you might think that it's more boring than I think it is. Funnily enough, I actually started this as the audiobook because I ran out of podcasts to listen to. So I was like, well, I know I'm gonna read it, I may as well start as the audiobook. Absolutely hated the audiobook. Thought it was so cringy. Honestly, you're just gonna have to listen to it to understand what I'm saying, because I feel like I'm not gonna explain it properly. But essentially, because the book is written in both Anastasia and Nate's perspectives, they have a female and a male reading the book. But when it's Anastasia's point of view, she also voices Nate or any other character that is currently in the chapter. So when it switches over to Nate's perspective, it's also the male voicing Anastasia and any other character. And it's just like, it's something about it is so cringy when the female's like doing a lower voice because she's doing a male, and then yeah, it's just, I wouldn't recommend. But reading it, I would recommend. Honestly, a super easy read, and I honestly have nothing really bad to say about this. So I think if you're getting into reading and you want to try a romance slash pretty tame smart book, highly recommend. Now, speaking of audiobooks, I hate them. Quite frankly, I usually hate them. There is something about them that is cringy and uncomfortable, not fast paced enough, but if you try and speed it up, it just is so obvious that you've sped it up and it's hard to keep up with, and it's just not a fun time. But I did find two that were bearable, if not enjoyable. The first one that I read slash listened to was The Woman in Me by Britney Spears. And this is an audiobook, was amazing. Like, best possible way that you could do an audiobook. It was read by a woman who, in my mind, sounded a lot like Britney Spears, same accent, same sort of like demeanor. So it almost felt as if Britney was reading it to you. So that was just like A+ in that sense. Also, my biggest peeve with audiobooks is because when you're recording, they do tell you to slow down so you can speak clearly and you have proper diction. So obviously people can understand you and not ramble on like I am right now. But that then causes a slower pace and longer pauses in between paragraphs and sentences and everything like that, and that's when you lose me. But I found specifically with this book, if you sped it up to 1.2 on Spotify, perfect. It was as if it was fast enough that someone was just having a conversation with me and just telling me a story, as opposed to someone like literally reading something out. So I feel like if you have that issue with audiobooks, that one actually worked out for me, and I quite enjoyed listening to it. I feel like everyone knows what The Woman in Me is about. It was all over the media for various reasons. But if you don't, it is a autobiography slash biography about Britney Spears' life. It goes way back into her childhood, how she was brought up, into the early days of her career, into the censorship that we all know about, as well as parts of her relationships that we didn't necessarily know about. And some of it is quite confronting, which obviously makes it really engaging. But yeah, even if you're not a Britney fan, which I'm not overly a Britney fan, I would actually highly recommend this one. And if you don't think that you're a biography reader, which I'm not, audiobook's the way to go. The next audiobook that I listened slash read was I Don't Need Therapy and Other Lies I Tell Myself by Toni Lodge. If you know Toni Lodge, you know what I'm talking about. She is absolutely freaking hilarious. If you are to get any advice from this video, it is go listen to the Toni and Ryan podcast. I know that has nothing to do with books, but it also kind of does. They are absolutely hilarious. They are an Aussie comedy podcast, and they just talk shit, to be honest. But it is such a feel-good time, and that is how I found her book. Coming off that, I feel like if you don't, I guess it's kind of like any biography. If you don't really know of the person, you're probably not going to have an interest in their biography or autobiography. But I thought it was good. It's actually read by Toni, which gives it a little bit more of like that podcast feel, because she does she knows what emotion to put into each part of the book because she wrote it. It's essentially what it is, an autobiography. It's about her life. It dips into her past, the death of her mother, which is quite a big topic for her steps in her career, going from studying audio at WAPA to where she is now in the podcasting world. It's a very sweet book, but it's her first book, and she's not a writer, and you can kind of tell. She tends to switch back and forth in past to present to sort of like lots of different timelines, and it did get slightly confusing at times and a little bit like chaotic. I don't mind a, you know, past, present sort of, you know, time switch, but I felt as though it was just a little bit too jumbled, but the humor was nice. I enjoyed the humor. But yeah, if you're a fan, I'd recommend it. Next up, we had a fail. We had a big fail. Where did I get to? I got to here in this book. Not this side. This side. This is Everything I Know About Love by Dolly Alderton, and I hated it. It is another humorous biography, memoir, autobiography type, and I just couldn't follow it. Obviously by the title you can tell it's a memoir about her experience with love, friendships, relationships, all of the above. And it was just really difficult to follow. It is based in England, and there are a lot of references to places in England, which I obviously have no idea about. So I feel like there was a little bit of disconnect there. It is also set in a time that I did not exist. So she makes a lot of references to online messaging groups, which I didn't know existed, and again, just really hard to follow. And this could be your main problem. This is highly rated, and I just could not get my head around it. It jumps around within the chapter of timelines, and there's so much information that's thrown at you. She talks about her first house as a child and the street she lived on and the friend that she had there, and then jumps to high school or college where there's a whole new group of friends that you have to learn about and remember, and then she jumps to her 20s where she's drinking and partying, and then jumps back to high school, and it's just like so confusing. And it's written really well, so well that I can't follow it. It's probably more on the literary side, and my brain can't do literary. It needs to be more simple. So even though I did not finish this, I would give this a absolute hell no of a recommendation. If you were a non-reader, it's not worth racking your brain and getting disappointed that you're not going to finish a book. And last but not least, if you know me, if you know anything about me, you know I will always rave about Robin Harding. I was psyched for months when I heard this was coming out. I have almost every single one of her books. I think I'm missing one, but I honestly want to buy it just to have it as like a trophy on my shelf, because I adore her writing. I will say, I loved every single one of her books up until the last two. I believe it was The Perfect Family and The Drowning Woman. They were a bit of a miss. Would not necessarily recommend them, but she brought it back around with this one. If you love thriller and suspense and all the good stuff that makes you come back because the chapter ended on a cliffhanger and you just have to read more and find out who did it, this is your book. This follows the character Cameron Lane, who is a school counselor who manages to publish her very first book. And with all the excitement and the publicity comes bad reviews. It starts offline and pretty tame, but then slowly creeps into her personal life and actually becomes pretty dangerous and scary, to the point where it is quite literally driving her insane. Not only that, she also has to deal with her actual job and the problems that are happening within the high school with bullies and more online bullying that's not even directed at her. And the way that all of this creeps into her own life and starts affecting friends and family is just insane. I absolutely love this for multiple reasons. One, I did not want to put it down. That is tick of approval, highly recommend. There was not only the main storyline, there was a sub storyline of what was happening with the people around her. So you're like trying to figure out who's behind both situations. And what I absolutely loved was the other sort of like perspective, I guess. With Robin Harding's writing, she always writes from at least two different perspectives from main characters in her stories. With this one, she did it a little bit differently. It was only the perspective of the author, but between 3 to 4 chapters, you would get an insert of the character's novel. So gradually you would get an understanding as to why she's getting the hate online and why people are upset about her novel. And honestly, I want to read the book that she wrote, like within the book. It's amazing that she managed to make the actual story interesting and then the book that the story is about within it also interesting. I could honestly talk about this forever, but if you haven't noticed already, I highly recommend, and you should read it right now, as well as everything else Robin Harding has ever written. That is all for my book review as a non-reader. I hope you enjoyed and you found a couple of new books to read. If you have any recommendations, please let me know down in the comments. I would love to hear recommendations. I actually don't have that big of a TBR at the moment. I am, however, I'll give you a little sneak peek into the next video. I am, however, reading Blue Sisters, and I'll tell you right now, I love it. I haven't even finished it. I've got that much left and love it. Hopefully my opinion doesn't change by the end of the book, but get excited to hear a review about this one. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure you like, subscribe, do all the good things, and that's it. See you in the next one.